Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional from the world of academia, from London, UK, Professor Paolo Taticchi. Paolo, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be in your show.
Thank you. Professor Taticchi is the Professor of Strategy and Sustainability at the University College of London, its School of Management. In addition to his academic and advisory work, he's also an entrepreneur, having co-founded 4 firms in the fields of engineering, technology, and consultancy. He has been chosen by the influential website Poets and Quants as one of the world's top 40 business school professors under the age of 40. So, Paolo, before we talk about strategy and sustainability, tell me about your own journey in brief.
So I guess I'm kind of an unusual academic because since the very beginning, I decided to try to develop a portfolio career. So the academic journey has been the core of my professional journey. But during my PhD, I started my first company back in Italy. Since then I started 3 more, 1 more in Italy, 2 more in the UK. So I have a kind of an entrepreneurial experience, and over the years I've been very active as a consultant, both for the corporates and governments, and I'm also very active in public speaking. So every week is different for me. You know, I move every day from research to consulting to training Fortune 500 companies. A lot of traveling. I basically developed projects in, I guess, maybe more than 15 countries, 4 continents. These days, I spend a lot of my time in the US, in the Middle East, in Asia, helping organizations to become more sustainable, which is my area of specialization, my passion, and I guess my mission in life.
Fascinating, fascinating. So, Paolo, how do you define sustainability transformation in the context of modern businesses?
That's a very good question, and I don't believe today many managers and entrepreneurs necessarily have the right answer to that question. I guess we come from decades where basically the topic of sustainability in business was basically treated as a CSR topic. This idea that companies should give back. So basically use a part of revenue or part of profit to support initiatives that do create a positive impact on society. These basically approaches of the past didn't really help companies to minimize the negative impacts, didn't help companies to change their mindset. So this basically resulted over the years in a lot of situations, for example, of greenwashing or social washing. So today, I guess it is kind of clear that if we wanted to achieve a sustainable development of society, business plays an important role in that agenda. And therefore, we want companies not only to minimize their negative impacts on the environment or on society, but we want them to be, positive actors in society. And this basically calls for the integration of what is called ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors in decision making. So sustainable transformation at the end is about building better organizations that are more responsible, but that at the same time are also very competitive. So there is no tension between, or there shouldn't be a tension between the topic of sustainability and the topic of profit, because if you develop the right approaches for sustainability, you can actually build very competitive organizations.
What a great response. Thank you. And what, in your view, are some of the biggest challenges companies face in implementing sustainable practices?
Of course, there are a few. I guess the main one I recognize from my work with companies is kind of the lack of education. I studied my MBA only about 15 years ago, and in 1 year program, not a single professor mentioned the word sustainability to me at the time. And today, if you offer an MBA program in a top university, it is mandatory to include the sustainability in the curriculum. So today, the kind of the graduates, the future generation of business leaders, they are educated on this topic. They understand why it is why sustainable transformation is important and why it is going to affect the competitiveness of companies in the future. But the current managers, the current executives, the current entrepreneurs, they didn't receive necessarily that type of education. So I guess today they are engaging with this topic because they start understanding that there are risks, opportunities associated to sustainable transformation. They appreciate the importance for brand and reputation for the company. But generically speaking, when I interact with companies and the management teams of companies, I find basically a huge basically lack of know-how, lack of education on this topic. And this is why many corporations today are investing on training their management teams on ESG, because basically that's the very first starting point. You need your people, your human capital, to understand why this is important, and then you can start strategizing on that.
Very interesting. And one of the other challenges that I have seen with a lot of businesses is, how do you balance competitive strategy and sustainability?
Yeah.
Love to get your perspective.
Yeah, so of course, in business, you always have you always face trade-offs of different kind. You always have competing priorities, and that's, I guess, something very normal when you are in a management position. I guess I don't see sustainability as something going in a different direction from real strategy or real business. I believe the big goal, the big challenge is to try to integrate sustainability into competitive strategy. In the past, when sustainability was approached, as I said before, as a CSR topic, it became completely disconnected from real business. It became completely disconnected from strategy. In the best scenario, it was connected to marketing and communication. While today we are trying to position sustainability as a strategy topic, and therefore the sustainable transformation is entering the executive agenda and the agenda of boards. Now, I guess today the big difference compared to 10 years ago, for example, is that there is a huge pressure for sustainable transformation coming from a plurality of stakeholders. So governments are pushing for sustainable transformations, clients, investors, employees, of course, NGOs and other organizations that are stakeholders of companies. So it's not anymore just one stakeholder demanding for this change, is a plurality of them, and this is creating the necessary pressure for action today.
And how has the concept of competitive advantage evolved in the area of sustainability? Because I know young people like you are always looking for sustainable practices in business, unlike baby boomer generation like me.
So, first of all, thank you for suggesting I'm young.
Well, you told me 15 years ago MBA, so I assumed I know.
But to your question, I guess the famous Michael Porter definition of competitive advantages is still valid today. I mean, the kind of classic definition suggests that companies can develop a competitive advantage in industry because they develop attributes that basically allow them to outperform competitors financially in the long term. So first of all, when you speak about competitive advantage, is a long-term game, and kind of sustainability is very much about long-term approaches to business. And then when you speak about competitive advantage, there is never one attribute that makes the difference and explains the success. Is a combination of attributes. So my view is that today sustainability is definitely a driver of competitiveness in any kind of industry, okay, as a digital transformation, as agility, as other factors. But of course, there are companies that decide to push strategies that very much leverage sustainable transformation and sustainability positioning. So at that point, they really try to build a competitive advantage on sustainability. So that specific attribute becomes more relevant than the others. So I don't know, Patagonia in the US could be, a classic example of a company that not only integrated the sustainability into its strategy, but really pushed it to another level with the goal of building a competitive advantage in industry on sustainability. So I think the two topics are definitely related. I don't expect any company to develop a competitive advantage based on sustainability, but I do expect any company to try to integrate sustainability somehow in operations and strategy.
Very well said. And what, in your view, and based on all the consulting work that you do, what are some of the common misconceptions managers and leaders have about sustainability?
I guess the probably major concern or major misconception is that sustainability or sustainable transformation is like a new cost of doing business. And very often you get that from managers who basically look at sustainability simply as a compliance topic. And of course, sustainability is also a compliance topic. And compliance very often is perceived as a cost by organizations. But the reality is that sustainability and sustainable transformation can unlock several business opportunities. So you can kind of create revenue, can create profit out of sustainability positioning. So I believe the misconception is very much associated to I guess the level of education of the company, the mindset of the company, and how you approach this this topic. But this idea that sustainability is a cost is wrong. Is simply wrong. And very often when I hear managers and entrepreneurs speaking about sustainability like that, I immediately understand that their approach is not the right one. So there is work to be done.
Very interesting. My next question for you is that when you go and start consulting with any organization, or when you're speaking at large seminars, what is the first step you recommend to leaders to start their journey towards sustainability?
Yeah, very good question. I guess the first recommendation I always make before jumping on implementing projects or designing a strategy is to really discuss in the organization the business case for sustainable transformation, because there is research suggesting that very often companies start these journeys without understanding the business case for that. So spending time discussing why we should be doing this is extremely, extremely important. Now, there are a number of common factors that very often help to build the business case. There is the importance from a reputation perspective. So importance for the brand, importance for corporate reputation, and that's one of them. Compliance is another factor. Possible benefits associated to the cost of operations, because when you speak about sustainability at the level of operations, we are really looking at optimization of operations. So it comes with cost benefits. Then there is the topic of risk, ESG risks that today are very real. And then there is the topic of business opportunities. So it's very important to understand all of these elements of the business case. If we invest on sustainability, what type of opportunities we can unlock, what type of commercial opportunities we should try to explore. If we are investing on sustainability, what type of ESG risks are we managing? Because if you can basically build the business case correctly, that basically will inform your strategy. And at that point, you are going in the right direction. And the managers understand the value of that agenda, because it's been defined in the normal way, in the way that business discusses any other project. Okay. So if you invest in sustainability, you should the type of return that you expect should be clear to the management team.
Very interesting. So Paolo, let's now move from sustainable businesses to sustainable cities, because you do a lot of work with the governments as well. What are some of the key elements of a sustainable city?
That's a good question. I guess first of all, I appreciate you use the word sustainable and not necessarily smart, because very often we speak about smart cities and not necessarily all people like that, because this concept of a smart city was commercially pushed by some multinational companies, and not necessarily everyone is on board with that. But I guess we need to understand that cities will play a major role in our future. Okay, basically 80% of GDP growth is created in the largest cities of the world. So when you look at basically designing cities, you are looking at designing economies. Okay, so that's the very first important observation. Second, in 2011, if I remember well, was the year when for the first time half of the world's population started living in urban areas and half in rural areas. The forecast is that by 2050, 70% of the world's population is going to live in cities. So there is a huge pressure on cities that is driven by population growth. We are growing at the speed of light. Okay, you have 8 billion people today. 2 centuries ago, the population in the planet was 1 billion. So 8 times in 200 years, that's huge. And that is a proxy of the level of pressure that population is creating on planet resources and on cities. So we do need to get cities right. So when we speak about sustainable cities, we refer to cities that are, for example, energy efficient. We refer to cities that are livable, cities that are able to support the needs of citizens. Cities that are able to create local economies that support the life of population. Cities that are resilient, because we know, for example, that the large majority of cities in the world is in coastal areas, largest cities at least. And that means that they are particularly exposed to, for example, extreme weather events associated to climate change. So if we want to avoid disruption and social sufferance associated to these events, we need to redesign cities so they can be more resilient. So there are kind of really a lot of topics that are addressed by cities today. But I guess generically speaking, you are looking at environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, social sustainability, social justice as some of the important topics.
Very interesting. So time for two more questions. My next question is that how is sustainability being integrated into business education today?
Yeah, very good question. So this is something that has been happening, I would say, significantly for the last 10 years. It became clear that if we wanted to change business and society, we had to educate leaders of business and society in a different way.
Right.
Today, for example, in the world of business schools, where we have some kind of international accreditations that are very relevant for what we do, these accreditations now push schools to integrate the sustainability in curricula at different levels. So today in management curricula, you will find standalone modules, very often core modules, focused on sustainability, but you also integrate sustainability in all the traditional modules. So today, if you study finance at UCL, you also learn about sustainable finance. If you study operations, so you also learn about sustainable operations. So it's basically this idea that sustainability should be integrated into decision making and therefore touches any kind of management subject that you can name. So this is happening very quickly. I've done a lot of work on this both at Imperial College London and University College London. And what is for me fascinating is that the pressure is coming from students. They really want this. They have an interest for sustainability projects. They have an interest to learn about sustainability. So this is is the best pressure that we can get to drive this type of change, because of course students are our customers.
Well said. And my last question to you: what is your vision for the future of sustainability in business and society?
I guess this is a kind of a journey that affects business and government. That a journey that started a long time ago, to be honest, but for sure accelerated in the last 10 years. And we're not going back. So I guess my vision is that organizations that are not going to take this seriously will not survive. And my vision is that this is a topic of sustainable transformation will affect the ability of companies to compete in markets. So my advice to business leaders out there is be serious about it. Make sure you have the right strategies about it, and start this process of change that starts today and will last forever.
Very interesting. And on that note, Paolo, thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for speaking to me about so many different aspects of sustainability. I learned many new things from you today. Thank you for speaking to me, not just about sustainability for managers, companies, but thank you also for speaking to me about sustainability when it comes to city and society. Thank you again.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.